realized in doing a little research on you, I have been a fan of yours for quite some time. I saw Unbanned, I saw Through Our Eyes, I saw the 90s, the 2000s. I was like, okay, I know her. Okay, we're gonna have a good little combo. Okay.
That's great.
Yeah, and I met Julie and Betsy one day on a rooftop while they were promoting RBG back in the day.
Oh wow, great.
Yeah, so I'm really curious. They're wonderful women. So I'm curious to know how you guys ended up collaborating for My Name is Pauli Murray.
So I also previously knew Betsy and Julie. We had collaborated on a project on groundbreaking women, but we were specifically profiling women who were living at that time. And so since then, they went off, they made RBG. And as you may know,
they left you behind. They were like, "Hi, girl, we're going to go over here and make RBG. We're going to talk to the bad Mama Jamma." I'm sorry, I'm being silly.
That's
sorry,
fine.
Go ahead.
That's great. That's great. So when they made RBG, that is actually how they learned about Pauli Murray's story. Pauli Murray was so influential on Justice Ginsburg's work that when she mentioned Pauli Murray, they thought, oh, that sounds like an interesting person. And they began researching and learned all that Pauli had done. And they thought, wow, we should really be making a film. Our next film should be about Pauli Murray. And then they reached out to me. And because we had worked together before, we knew that we could collaborate well together. And so after they ticked through all the things that Pauli Murray had accomplished, I was definitely on board with making the film.
And I'm so glad that you were. I also know about you that you always tackle subjects and projects that people don't want to talk about. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to acknowledge it. They just don't. The series the two series that you did for CNN, the 90s and the 2000s, that's encompassing a decade and everything that's happening within that decade. Right. But these other projects that you did, they are not for the faint of heart. And if you're trying to live in a rabbit hole with your head down, you better run for cover, because Talleah is coming for you with her projects. Were you so overwhelmed by the amount of archives that Pauli left behind? Because when they show that room in the film with all those tapes and diaries and just the plethora of material that she, who has the mindset to go, you know what, I'm just going to document everything?
At such an early age too. Pauli was not very old when this started happening. And so Pauli did not have a lot of resources in life, but several people tell the story of Pauli moving from place to place to place and packing up all these boxes and trucking them along. And, for us, it's overwhelming, but it's also a godsend. Without that, I don't know that we would have been able to make this film. And so we were so fortunate that Pauli didn't just save speeches and poems and things like that, but Pauli saved things that were so personal. Pauli was a very private person. And so a lot of the published writings don't really get at Pauli's personal interior life. Mm-hmm. And what we discovered in the archive is that there are so many letters to friends, so many years and years, decades of diary entries. And so that really allowed us to paint a multidimensional portrait of Pauli Murray.
This is something that I saw on I think it might have been on your Twitter page, and it was an excerpt from a book that was written about Pauli called A Personal and Political Life by Troy Saxby.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to get your thoughts on this quote, because I saw this. I'm I know you posted this for a reason, and I can't wait to talk to you about it. And I'm just going to do an excerpt of it. Sure. You share our songs, our contributions to the field of entertainment and music. You go wild over our dance orchestrations. You just love our good old spirituals. You quote our quaint philosophies in your poetry and literature. You think we're just grand in, I can't remember that, grand in something. And you resent our intelligence and our determination to also better ourselves. Or do you? What are your thoughts on that quote?
So, that's iconic Pauli, right? Pauli, from a very young age, even as a child, could see the injustice of segregation. Pauli grew up in the South and came from a very educated, very well-off, actually, family, and constantly hit up against so many limitations that were just based on race. You know, Pauli was a brilliant mind and spent a lifetime never really being able to access all opportunities just because of the body that Pauli was born in. And so Pauli dedicated a life to pointing out that hypocrisy, right? Pauli was saying, you take these symbolic sort of, you take the symbolic part of us, but you are not taking us as complete people. You are not actually allowing us to flourish and integrate fully into this society. And Pauli dedicated a life to like basically pointing out that hypocrisy.
Yeah, she did. I was so, when I wrote the review for this, when I saw it at, I think I saw it at Sundance, or I may have seen it before that. You saw the review?
Yeah.
So when I wrote the review, I was so mad because I'm a Howard University graduate. Even as a student of Howard University, I didn't know who she was until I saw this documentary. I'm so tired of getting history taught to me through a film. I need for it to be taught to me in a classroom where it belongs.
Right.
But not only was she a HBCU grad, but she also was, I don't think she graduated from UNC Chapel Hill, did she?
Did not even get in.
Yeah, so and I'm bringing this up for this reason, because how many years later did UNC Chapel Hill come in the news again for the very same thing? Right. What the hell?
Right. No, and I think that for me, it's interesting to hear you say you were so angry, because I had the same response learning about Pauli's story. And it's especially infuriating to know that this story is actually really timely, right? It's like so many decades later, and we as a society are still grappling with these same issues. And it's incredibly frustrating. I mean, I can't even imagine. Pauli was so optimistic, right? Pauli kept thinking, if we just explain to these people this injustice that they are perpetrating, then they will stop. They will begin to change their ways. And so to pitch forward so many decades into the future and see that we're still having these exact same conversations, as you say, with some of the exact same institutions, it's maddening. It's maddening.
That blew my mind. And it also blew my mind when she said, there was something that she said when she talked about how people think that Blacks are inherently inferior to whites and women
are inherently inferior to men. Right.
And how we're living in a world where that's slowly but surely getting turned on its, well, at least one of them is slowly but surely getting turned on its head. You know, I am the curvy critic and I shoot straight from the hip.
Yeah. I mean, Pauli was one of the earliest people having a conversation about that, what we now call intersectionality, right? The idea that there are people who are Black women, in particular women of color, who are facing discrimination based on both gender and race. And while the language that Pauli was using was a little bit different, Pauli called it Jane Crow. It is still getting at that idea that we as a society have to address both of those things. And that was because, what Pauli pointed out at a very, is that the civil rights movement was focused largely on Black men. And the women's rights movement was focused largely on white women. And Pauli was saying, you have to do better. You have to actually talk about the discriminations that I am facing as a person who is viewed as a woman, viewed as a Black woman.
Absolutely. Well, I want to wrap this up by saying one of her quotes where she says, hope is a song in a weary throat. Yeah. And you guys are giving us hope by bringing her story and everything that encompasses the world and the life of Pauli Murray to the forefront. Thank you so much, Talleah. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. This was a pleasure.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.